another question I often get, and it often boils down to, was, did Jesus really rise from the dead? See, if he did, that kind of proves he was God. And if he didn't, well, what happens there? So what do you think?
As soon as someone asks that, up pops into my mind a mnemonic. It just helps me to remember, right, how am I going to answer this? And it's important that we do, because like you say, it's a central part of Christianity. Without the resurrection, the rest of it falls apart. So the mnemonic that pops into my head is power, Power. And the words attached to this would be possibility, opponents, witnesses, embarrassment, and revolution. By starting with possibility, I'd be asking, do you think it's possible that there's a God? It's really important for them to know their own answer to that before then asking, could Jesus have risen from the dead?
Just looking at the root of their question.
Exactly.
If it's a no.
Exactly. If it's a no, then how could God have risen Jesus from the dead? How could that be possible? But possibility, if someone can just acknowledge on the basis of our answer of the first question, okay, so there's a possibility that there might be a God. Great. Then I'll move on swiftly to O. And I'd say, well, look at the opponents of Jesus. Look at the opponents of the resurrection. In a courtroom today, if you could have one testifying as a witness who used to be an opponent of something, but has done a U-turn completely, great personal sacrifice to himself, well, that's invaluable, that testimony. And that's what we have in the Apostle Paul. He was the greatest opponent of Jesus. He was dragging Christians out left, right, and centre, having them persecuted, jailed, stoned. For him to do a U-turn and then say, no, actually, I've seen the resurrected Jesus too, well, that's a really valuable testimony to have. Really good evidence that there's something that happened in Paul's life. If it's for his own benefit, you could understand it, but it's the opposite. In this world's terms anyway, it's quite the opposite. He lost everything. Move on to W, witnesses. We're so fortunate that within the Gospels, 2 of them were written by eyewitnesses. The other 2 were written as from sources of eyewitnesses. And to have eyewitness accounts is really important. Now let's talk about those witnesses, because the first witnesses to the resurrection were women. And if you're making up the story of the resurrection, you wouldn't choose women. Back in the day that these were written, that's the last people that you would choose to be the witnesses to the resurrection. Their testimony just didn't mean nearly as much as it would from a man. Now, of course, what was true back then isn't true now. Now we kind of think, what does it matter that it's women? But we could see the fact that women were first witnesses and the writers said it was women. Well, that would go against them at the time, unless it's the truth. And so it adds value to why I know the resurrection took place, because if it was made up, they wouldn't have made it up like that. E is for embarrassment. And again, those writers of the Gospels, when they're talking about Jesus' resurrection, they're self-denigrating. It's embarrassing for them to say, you know what, Jesus told us this would happen. How embarrassing that this would happen when you think about the likes of Peter. You know, he's such a wonderful, powerful follower of Jesus, and yet he didn't believe this most magnificent event would happen, even after it had happened. So the embarrassment, again, is a big clue that this is the truth, because if these accounts are made up, if the account of Jesus' resurrection is made up, the whole thing is a fabrication, you make yourself look good in those fabrications. You don't write something that's a lie to make yourself look bad. You might lie about making yourself look good. You don't lie about making yourself look bad. Why would you do that? Especially if that lie then ends up with you being persecuted and tortured. Which leads me on to R, revolution. And those disciples, they were transformed completely. They're hiding in a room one minute. They'd recognized and seen the resurrected Jesus, and now they're the unstoppable evangelists to the world. And the fact that they're then willing to die horrific deaths for this belief in the resurrection, to me, is more evidence that the resurrection actually took place. And of course, if that hadn't happened, they wouldn't have then passed on the message, and you and I wouldn't be sat here today talking about it. No resurrection, no church, no book talking about the resurrection.
Exactly.